Hello, thank you for joining Navigating Animal Welfare Legislation in North America, Insights for Biotech and Pharma. This is the first in our series on animal welfare legislation across the world. I'd like to give a brief introduction. My name is Megan Loy, and I'm the Senior Category Director for In Vivo Services at Scientist.com. One of my key roles is to support animal welfare quality and compliance for our clients and suppliers. I'm also a board member on the 3Rs Collaborative. I'm joined today by Dr. Megan LaFollette, the Executive Director of the 3RC, as well as Diana Hornberger, Director of Regulatory and Quality at Certus Oncology Solutions. So first, I want to talk a little bit about why we're here today and talking about animal welfare legislation. You might wonder what Scientist.com has to do with that. And actually, Scientist.com is a solution for outsourced research. And as you can imagine, the 4,000 suppliers that we have on the marketplace, for some of those, in vivo services are a main component of their business. So because we have a little bit of a matchmaking role for researchers and the suppliers that service them, and we have the agreement in place, we also help to do a little bit of the due diligence and the quality. So that's where the animal welfare really comes in here. Scientist.com was built by scientists and for scientists. As you can imagine, we're really passionate about what we do, and we work with over 130 clients across the globe. As I mentioned, there's 4,000 plus suppliers, and we've completed over 40,000 projects at this point. So our team of experts is here to support you and assist you at any time, whether that's with an in vivo project and you're concerned about animal welfare, or you're just ordering a simple assay or even some consumables off the shelf. I'd like to get into a little bit of the history of animal welfare legislation, specifically in North America, so you can understand where we've come from. You might have heard a few of these stories before, but in the beginning, the legislation was really just focused around cruelty. It wasn't really related to welfare. So the Massachusetts Bay Colony actually had a law in place as early as 1641, and they still called animals brute creatures back then, but you can see they mention tyranny and cruelty in here. So the animal's value at this point was really strongly connected to sustaining human life. Draft animals specifically provided for labor, travel ability, meat, milk, fibers, things like that. So the loss of an animal was a threat to your survival. It wasn't just the right thing to do to not be a tyrant or a cruel person, but it could actually threaten your life and well-being. So they outlawed things like beating animals, making sure they had rest and feed. And also, the thing to note about this is that because they were still property at this time and they were seen as tools for man's use, there was the potential for that property to be disrespected. So the offense here was actually caused to the owner and not to the animal specifically, which is an interesting early take on animal welfare. Now, when we're getting into the late 19th to the early 20th centuries, we're kind of expanding these protections. They're going beyond just cruelty. And this man right here is Henry Berg. He was on assignment in Russia as a diplomat in the 1860s, and he saw a carriage driver that was beating his fallen horse, and this really impacted him. When he returned to New York, he decided that he was going to do something about this. He founded the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, or the ASPCA. And back in this time, America wasn't really the greatest place for animals working or otherwise. So there were a lot of workhorses on the street with overloaded carts. There were dog catchers. Their dog fighting and cockfighting were pretty common. So he actually believed that all animals were entitled to respect and kind treatment. And he wanted them to actually be protected under the law. So when he started this, there really wasn't any legislation in place anymore. So his founding of the ASPCA and his relentless lobbying and his political connections prompted New York State to pass one of the first effective anti-cruelty laws. This same movement around the time also saw the Royal SPCA in Canada being established. And it also led to a lot of activists paying attention to kind of the plight of these domestic animals. The other important aspect of this is that he actually got dispensation to patrol the streets. So it wasn't just a law, it was an actual entire system where he could police the streets. He had officers, they wore uniforms and badges, and they could actually enforce this law. So it's really where the statement that it's the first effective anti-cruelty law comes in, because he was able to actually go out and help enforce it. This picture here to the right is one of the first ambulances actually in New York, and it was for horses specifically. So even though these animals were still legally defined as property, he really helped the legislation recognize cruelty was for the animal itself and was irrespective of the ownership. Around this time, Canada also added animal cruelty to their criminal code. Now, coming into the mid-20th century, you might notice there's a small gap here of the early 20th century, and that's because from 1920 to 1960, there was kind of a lot going on. There were 2 world wars, and obviously post-World War II led to quite a boom, and there were more animals being used intensively in animal agriculture systems, as well as animals being used in biomedical research. This was also a time when there was a lot of kind of awareness and activism. So when Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, Ruth Harrison published Animal Machines, and then around this time, Jane Goodall's research on chimpanzees is also coming out. This is helping people kind of understand that what constitutes a moral concern for humans is also a moral concern for animals. So the focus isn't necessarily on the use of the animals themselves or how it impacts people, but on the moral standing. So this is where the field of biomedical ethics started to come out, and the study of animal behavior and ecology is getting more and more popular. The Bramble Report in Britain led to the establishment of the 5 freedoms: the freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from discomfort, pain, injury, disease, the freedom to express normal behavior, and the freedom from fear and distress. So this is a really watershed time in the animal welfare movement in the United States, as people are starting to recognize that there are ethical concerns involved here. This really got the public's attention, however, later in the 20th century, when a family Dalmatian named Pepper was actually captured by a dog catcher in rural Pennsylvania. This family had adopted this dog and it went missing. They spent a lot of time looking for it, eventually found out that the dog had been taken by a dog catcher, sold through a bunch of various channels, traveled kind of up into New York, and the dog had been euthanized at the end of a surgery. This media coverage of this and this story in Life magazine really caused a lot of public outrage. A representative in New York at this time introduced the Laboratory Animal Welfare Bill in Congress, which was basically the early precursor to the Animal Welfare Act. The idea was to protect owners of dogs and cats from the theft of their pets, but also to keep those pets being stolen and sold to research facilities. They also needed to be provided with humane care and treatment. It established licensing for dogs and cats and those dealers, and also let the Secretary of Agriculture regulate the transportation, the sale, and the handling of animals for other purposes, pre-research for other purposes. So that act covered dogs, cats, non-human primates, guinea pigs, hamsters, and rabbits. Now, coming into the later part of the 20th century, the animal welfare legislation really started to expand. So the Animal Welfare Act has had quite a few amendments. There were a few in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. They started to add requirements that covered all warm-blooded animals used for research, except for horses and farm animals. But now the Act regulates more research facilities to protect animals throughout the entire process. It also covers exhibitors, carnivals, circuses, zoos, etc. Some later amendments expanded the definition of carrier so that animals were also protected if they were traveling by air or by road or by railroad. It offered new requirements for enriching the lives of non-human primates. So as you can see here in the picture on the left from the NC3Rs, non-human primate enrichment is really critical, and it's a kind of advancing science, and we're always trying to improve it. So that is now a requirement. And considering alternatives to painful or distressful procedures was also added. In 1985, that amendment also established IACUCs, which I know Diana will talk about a little bit later. And finally, in 1990, there was a requirement added that dogs and cats held at shelters have to be kept there for at least 5 days before being sold to a research facility. So you can see where it started with Pepper the dog and has really advanced in about 30 years there. They also expanded it to cover farm animals in more cases. Finally, in the 21st century, scope is expanding and also public awareness is. So in recent years, there's been a lot of much broader recognition of animal welfare issues that are not just stuck in the lab necessarily. You can see that there are a lot more policies for farm animal welfare and protection, for poultry, for things like that, even beef and dairy. You might remember a few years ago when a lot of people were talking about going to cage-free eggs, which really stuck with me because I actually have a degree in poultry science. And you can tell that the public is really making advances in these areas and pushing legislation. So in 2002, there was an amendment to the AWA to kind of limit the definition of animals to exclude birds and rats and also mice. But then additionally, we've added some amendments in later years to, do things like decrease cockfighting and other fighting ventures, things like that. So there's been a lot of changes in a very, very short period of time. And actually Mexico, which I will talk about in a little bit, is one of the most recent big advancements. In 2021, they banned cosmetics testing on animals. So the legislation is continuing to evolve. But it is important to note that the legislation is focused on things like lack of cruelty and lack of maltreatment, not necessarily the right things to do, which is what we're going to get to in a little bit here. So there is a lot of federal legislation that covers animal welfare, and there's many, many different acts. So in Canada, animal welfare is mainly governed by the Criminal Code, sections 444 through 447. There's also a Health of Animals Act and a Meat Inspection Act. In the US, as I just mentioned, we have the Animal Welfare Act, we have the Humane Methods of Livestock Slaughter, we have the Endangered Species Act, and recently the Health Research Extension Act. I also mentioned earlier that Mexico was the first North American country to ban cosmetics testing. There at the bottom, that was in 2021. But they also have General Law of Wildlife and Federal Animal Health Acts. So there's a lot of regional legislation, but at a federal level in different regions. So as I mentioned, in Canada, there's no really direct legislation of laboratory animal welfare, but the federal government uses its criminal and spending authorities to kind of shape that behavior. So the central feature of this is the Canadian Council on Animal Care. And it was formed to support universities and government departments that do animal-based science. So there are a few other acts and things that go along with this, but really it's being driven by kind of an idea of what not to do. So as you see here, direct legislation and regulation are the minimum requirements for oversight. It delivers sanctions. It kind of punishes those who do wrong, but it doesn't necessarily go into telling you what the right thing is, which is so critical for us. In the United States, non-legislative tools are also very, very critical. So there is some federal and national laws that are applicable to animals in research, the Animal Welfare Act, and also the Health Research Extension Act. Those give authority to different departments to do these regulations, to inspect the facilities and to enforce violations. But again, they don't necessarily give you a list of what the right things are to do. That's where the guide for the care and use of laboratory animals kind of comes into this. So the specifically the Public Health Services Act supports research by the NIH. So this is a kind of a non-regulatory system where the legislation says you have to follow certain guidelines or you can't deviate from basically the right thing to do, but here comes in the guide to tell us what that correct thing is. So the states in the US, despite the fact that we like to self-govern, they don't really play a very major role in animal research. So the institutional animal care and use committees self-regulate, just like in Canada. In Mexico, they actually have some very interesting legislation passed in 1999 that actually pulls in a lot of different things. So Mexico has federal and state level legislation that addresses animal welfare. There is uh, the AVMA guidelines come into this, as does the guide, and then the Canadian guidelines on laboratory animal facilities. They've brought those all together to inform this NORMA 1999, and that includes things like ethical considerations for treating animals, outlining respect, care, and humane treatment, guidelines for appropriate housing and environments and well-being, health monitoring and veterinary care to maintain their health, detect, treat diseases, using anesthesia and analgesia to minimize their pain and distress, making sure laboratory animal individuals are trained appropriately, they're qualified, and then also making sure that those records are maintained so that you can document the origin, the health, and the use of these animals. So altogether, it's a very interesting regional difference. It does appear that Mexico has taken a little more weight on the federal side, but in the US and again in Canada, it's mostly self-regulated and it's done by the IACUCs. So with that, I'm really excited to share a few references and resources with you. If you'd like to read more, this will be available later in the handouts. But I would also like to hand it over to Megan LaFollette. Megan is going to talk a little bit about the side of the nonprofit and the non-government organization and how they influence animal welfare legislation and regulations. So with that, I'll hand it to you, Megan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Megan Loy. So I'm excited to talk to you guys today. I am Executive Director at the 3Rs Collaborative, where we really are focused on creating evidence-based, practical, and impactful 3Rs change. And so what I've really been asked to talk about today and what I'll go into is how a nonprofit and a non-government organization really can impact animal welfare. And impacting animal welfare, certainly for our nonprofit as well as many others, is very central to our mission. Our mission is really about advancing better science for both people and animals through facilitating these kind of collaborative 3Rs efforts focused on refinement, reduction, and replacement. And that science really comes first, but to the benefit of both people and animal welfare. So I've kind of laid out that there's 4 kind of key types of roles that nonprofits and NGOs can play in animal welfare. And I'll go through them bit by bit. So first I'll kind of talk about this goal of education, advocacy, and awareness. And also I'll note that our strategy really has these 3 key goals that are separated a little bit differently. We talk about kind of promoting the 3Rs broadly, a good research landscape, promoting specific 3R strategies, and then promoting our organization so that people know about us. But let's talk about these first 2 goals kind of at once because they are quite intertwined, and that's education, advocacy, and awareness of animal welfare issues, as well as research, problem solving, and consensus building about animal welfare issues. And this is really important because simply talking about an issue, getting awareness on it can be beneficial, but it's even better if you can do problem solving as to why it's not being used, and consensus building to really move things forward faster. So first I'm going to talk about kind of promoting our work to promote the 3Rs broadly and how, our nonprofit achieves these goals. So we provide 3Rs training. We're actually in the process of developing a 3Rs certificate course. It's going to be really engaging, virtual, self-paced, and a 5-hour training module on the 3Rs of animal research that will really help, we believe, change the landscape and improve the landscape by making the 3Rs really actionable and more than just a really brief highlight in a sort of class. We also promote culture of care through our compassion, fatigue, resiliency program. This is the thought that working with lab animals can be very challenging, kind of emotionally in the workplace, etc. But we depend on those people in order to promote animal welfare. And so in order to forward animal welfare, if we help the people, we can help the animals. And we have a whole resource hub on our website dedicated to this. And we've actually kind of created a starter pack for institutions to implement their own internal programs, because we really think it shouldn't just be up to the individual to support their own workplace wellness, but the workplace itself needs to support it. And so again, all of this is actually freely available on our website. And we're not only doing that, providing these resources, but like I said, we also do research in this area. So we're actually running the first longitudinal intervention trial on compassion, fatigue, resiliency in the field. And I actually just submitted what are hopefully going to be the final edits on our peer-reviewed manuscript. That's going to be linking professional quality of life, job satisfaction, and retention, which helps convince resource support from upper management. Again, standards are great, talking about resources, but ultimately it does take money and time and convincing other people to move animal welfare forward. So that's why we do, research like this to help make things a little bit more convincing. We also promote really specific 3R strategies that are evidence-based. This is a list of all of the ones that we're really focused on at this time. And we really evaluate what's going to be evidence-based, what has high impact, and what's practical. And this spans from replacement efforts such as artificial intelligence or microphysiological systems, environmental health monitoring, to refinement, to reduction. And so we have a lot of resources on each of these. What our general strategy is, like I've mentioned before, is we start by kind of having these strategic working groups. And a nonprofit is a really great way to get people involved across the entire industry versus kind of just talking just in a certain academic or pharma organization. And then we do these like discussion groups as well as surveys with the community to understand where we're at in terms of implementation. You can find an example of one of these surveys online. This is about environmental health monitoring practices, really understanding for soil bedding sentinels, which is a certain technique. I don't have the time to really go into the nitty-gritty of it, but it can be replaced. And we really wanted to understand why people were or were not doing it. And then really, once we do that, we can summarize where is the evidence base, what publications are there. We do presentations with subject matter experts and systematic reviews. And then we really address any barriers. We create kind of these practical time-saving resources, SOPs, tech hubs, how do you really switch, operational notes, etc. Again, I'm not going to go super deep into any of these particular topics, but here are two that are really relevant, related to mice primarily. And you can see from these screenshots on the website that we have everything from, these editable slide decks so that you can download and use them in-house, to doing a cost analysis, to e-learning courses so that people can really be trained on how to do a particular technique. Again, this is one of the ways we can really forward animal welfare. And I'm, really excited to share that we are making a difference, in part due to our initiative. We know that at least 6, I think at this point more than 8, probably many more than that, are replacing over 8,000 rodents each year, which is very exciting. So if you are interested in this, I believe this is also a handout, so you can link directly to the newsletter. But we put out this newsletter to people so that they get this information directly in their inbox, again, spreading that awareness of different 3Rs techniques. Now let's move on to legislation, policy, and setting standards. So for example, again, case study for our organization, we engaged with government requests for community input. We also work with ALAC, which is a international standards organization, and we have different vehicles such as private-public partnerships with the FDA. And so we might respond if the NIH asks for a request for information. We speak on working groups. We are involved in discussions. And then I'm also a member of the ALAC. I'm a member organization. And on the 3R Standards Subcommittee, ALAC, since so many organizations are accredited by ALAC, they can make, and they're also a nonprofit that literally sets standards. They're an accreditation organization. And so again, that's another way that nonprofits can operate. We do not, due to our 501c3 status, do a lot of actual lobbying and advocacy directly. But again, there's many other nonprofits that may play a more active role in policymaking, in particular, lobbying, etc., or educating the public and more. So the last thing is actually going to be the community engagement and collaboration. This is in our name as the 3Rs Collaborative. This is actually a picture of our 2023 board of directors. Haven't quite updated this slide yet, although the end of January is fast approaching. And you can see it really spans across academia, industry, other nonprofits, biotech, and more. And again, this allows everybody with a voice, with subject matter expertise, regardless of where they work, to actually get involved in the conversation and drive important factors forward, working together for the good of the community. This is also our current members. So we have our board of directors. We also have members of our organization that, again, are involved, are supporting our work. We are primarily funded by donations, by membership fees. And so we really depend on these guys to support us. And then this shows that they're really engaged. They're really engaged in the 3Rs. They're really moving things forward and committed to helping nonprofits as well. And again, with each organization, we can then help each one individually, kind of providing 3Rs training, promoting culture of care and knowledge. So again, they have even more access to our resources. So if anybody is interested in becoming a member or even just donating individual, we do have a website page on it, and you can always email me. I'm happy to chat at any time, and we're always interested in getting more people involved and helping more organizations. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Diana, our next speaker.
All right. Thank you, Megan. Good morning, everyone. I am Diana Hornberger, and I'm the Director of Regulatory and Quality at Certus Oncology Solutions, located in San Diego, California. I obtained my bachelor's degree in animal science from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and have been in vivo research for over 17 years now, with the last 6 years focusing on vivarium management, operations, regulatory and quality, and the CRO space. Previously with Crown Bioscience and now at Certus Oncology Solutions, a preclinical specialty CRO. My experience has allowed me to develop animal programs from the ground up, building out ICOOC committees, obtaining multiple ALAC accreditations, OLA assurances, and creating all required documentation to support these programs in full. Today, I'd like to discuss with you the animal welfare perspective from the CRO side. So we are going to discuss animal welfare and the CRO environment, organizational culture and animal welfare impact, and end on legislation and industry standards. How do they mix? First, we'll start with animal welfare in the CRO environment. So let's discuss United States compliance standards and laws. Why do we need all three of these? First, there's the guide. The guide is the main source of compliance standards as to what animal programs are based around in the United States. It covers everything from facility design specifics to anesthesia and euthanasia, and what the resource most audits and inspections are based off of. The guide is considered to be the minimum standard that we must adhere to. Secondly, in support of the guide and animal programs, we have the AVMA euthanasia guidelines, which are also considered to be standard practice for most animal programs. And finally, CFR Title IX, which covers primarily USDA species, but supports structure for establishing each research facility's ICOOC. These are what standards that the U.S. adheres to, and we are not required to follow regulations from other countries. We can exceed those standards, but can never work below those standards. Let's discuss the ICOOC. And why is my computer working? There we go. Now let's talk about the ICOOC. Sorry about that technical difficulty. The ICOOC is established by federal mandate in institutions that use live vertebrate animals for research, teaching, and testing activities. The ICOOC oversees and evaluates all aspects of the institution's animal care and use program. The ICOOC's role is to set high internal standards to ensure animals have the best quality of care and treatment. It is extremely important to educate staff to ensure compliance. This education does not just end with animal technicians. The marketing team, sales team, study directors, and all supporting staff should have an understanding of what has been approved in the animal care and use program and what the restrictions are. Additionally, it is critical to build a culture of respect for the ICOOC. This governing body is the reason that facilities animal program can even exist. It is required by federal law and cannot be overridden. I have experienced personally in my professional career friction between the ICOOC and senior management in companies. So this culture of respect is essential for success. At Certus, we have worked very hard to encourage our staff to raise their hand and ask questions. We want all of our study designs to be successful, but also compliant. Now let's discuss maintaining a higher standard for animal welfare. Obtaining an ALAC accreditation is something most CROs generally work toward. This accreditation establishes that your program operates with a higher standard of animal welfare. As a CRO, it shows potential clients that your program has set their internal standards higher and values animal welfare. At Certus, this accreditation has been extremely beneficial for successful completion of animal welfare and vendor audits. The OLA assurance is another standard that most CROs work towards. This allows us, as a supplier, to support academia or institutions that have been awarded PHS funds or federal grant money. OLA ensures that your program adheres to all federal regulations and offers the best quality support for research. Adherence to ALAC, OLA, and ICOOC oversight and governance maintain that higher standard for animal welfare. Let's discuss training and how it varies from industry to CRO. I started my career in industry, and in my personal experience, there was no training program. No one had a training folder, and there was no such thing as competency testing. When I entered the CRO space, this all changed. In this environment, there's a high volume of studies and a high number of animals, which equals more risk for deviation. Our technicians must be versatile and able to multitask and pivot from one skill to the next. For example, on a single study, a technician may be dosing, measuring tumors, and collecting clinical observations, and then have to immediately pivot to unplanned collections where the technician must create labels, make tubes, and fully set up for unscheduled collections. All tasks must be executed flawlessly to ensure all studies are conducted according to our study protocol with no deviations. There's no stress there. In addition to being versatile, our technicians must be efficient. When handling as many animals as they do, efficiency is key in maintaining low stress, which goes hand in hand with a high standard of animal welfare. This is why training is so important to ensure studies are conducted with the highest level of care possible. Collaboration and oversight with our attending veterinarian is extremely important to ensure the highest level of expertise when handling animals in training. Our veterinarian works very closely with our trainers to ensure they are training the staff to maintain a high standard of animal welfare. Finally, documentation is key. Complete, robust training files are highly important to auditors, inspectors, and the ICOOC. Now let's move into organizational culture and animal welfare impact. In support of the training program, we are always working towards continuously improving our animal program to positively impact animal welfare. Internally, we have implemented new handling methods such as cupping to decrease stress on animals, and the industry is heading more in this direction of handling to ensure less stress on the animals. Also, we have worked to improve our surgical capabilities. Certus specializes in orthotopic implantations such as stereotactic injections as demonstrated by our technician in this photo, which involve invasive, stressful surgical techniques. We are always working to refine our implantations to ensure high engraftment success, tight growth curves, and lower overage, decrease postoperative pain and stress on our animals. Robust and reproducibility in our studies leads to results that can be more highly translatable to the clinic. We've addressed the enrichment program to ensure our animals are challenged and stimulated consistently with their environment to limit stress. And we're always working very closely with our veterinarian to enhance our euthanasia techniques. Improvements such as these and others truly support our animal program and the commitment to animal welfare. Implementing continuous education for all staff members. I kind of touched on this earlier. It is very important to train your staff on the do's and don'ts of working with animals. We want to ensure that not just only our animal technicians, but like I said, our sales team, marketing team, and study directors understand what we can and cannot do with our study animals. Essentially, we don't want our sales team designing a study that bleeds a mouse 10 times in a day. We just cannot do that. And it's not safe or ethical to that animal. As well as our ICOOC-approved protocols restrict it. It's important to understand how the animal care and use program impacts study design. Training and education on new industry improvements that will impact how studies are designed and are executed is also very important, as well as understanding the difference between the ICOOC-approved protocol and the study protocol, and that the ICOOC-approved protocol always supersedes the study protocol. The study protocol must be designed with the ICOOC protocol in mind, not vice versa. Finally, the whistleblower policy. This is such an important tool. We want all of our staff to understand what this is and how to use it. They need to be trained on what to report, how to report, and who they can talk to about issues they observe. It is essential that all staff understand this tool and to ensure animal welfare is of the utmost importance. Implementing continuous education. Oh, excuse me, sorry. Let's move on to establishing a culture of care. Mice are animals, not tools. We take into account humane considerations for all aspects of their care, from housing them to euthanasia. Certus has a strong focus on advanced in-house imaging using mirroring scale MRIs and BLI machines, and we address handling the animals from loading to unloading these machines. Surgical preoperative and postoperative care is extremely important to us as well, since we focus so much on surgeries. We also strongly focus on training our staff to identify clinical signs that animals are exhibiting. Additionally, this goes back to the raising your hand and asking culture. If a mouse is showing signs of distress, we address it immediately. Finally, we are always open to new suggestions for improvement from not only our staff, but also from clients. We have had vendor audits that have identified new methods or refinements to our procedures that improved our processes, and we welcome this. Certus has an open door policy for new ideas to improve animal welfare or personnel welfare. We can't forget about the humans to ensure no burnout or compassion fatigue. Which leads us into managing compassion fatigue, also known as secondary traumatic stress. Compassion fatigue is now something the industry is acknowledging and addressing, as Megan did allude to. For the past few years, the industry is really starting to make more emphasis on this issue and offering more resources to those that work with animals. Compassion fatigue symptoms include moral stress, burnout, grief, and it does affect your personal life. Certus has built out a training program that informs our technicians about signs and symptoms of compassion fatigue and what resources are available to them. Certus's insurance plan provides resources for support as well as additional online platforms as resources. Not only do we train our animal technicians, but we have trained our supporting staff to understand the signs and symptoms. Having an outside set of eyes look at you and see what you can't is so important when it comes to this issue. We want to identify signs of compassion fatigue early, which can help to prevent any whistleblower actions and prevent us from becoming robots when handling these animals. Technicians who have a positive mindset and outlook create less stress for animals. This is extremely important to me. I worked for almost 9 years in animal behavior. My animals definitely could tell if I had a bad day or a good day. They would even know if I had a fight with my boyfriend. It would show in the data. These animals would pick up on your emotions, and we want to ensure our technicians are as positive as possible. Finally, let's move into legislation and industry standards. How do they mix? Let's address balancing CRO requirements with industry standards. Understanding what can be done versus what should be done. We have had clients that have designed studies that ask too many questions and have too many variables that the study is attempting to address. It is extremely important to educate not only the staff, but also clients to ensure the best study design is created and executed. This all staff education, as I touched on earlier in the discussion, is critical to understanding what laboratory animal limitations there are, as well as understanding the people welfare, and how much reasonably can be done on a study. At Certus, generally when we get a don't, we usually come back with what we can do on a study. If there are too many variables, we would suggest additional groups or animals, or even splitting the original study into multiple studies. Helping to transparently communicate ICOOC-approved protocol allowances such as dosing cadence and volume, surgical abilities, bleed cadence and volumes, and humane endpoints is of utmost importance. Personally, in my career, bleed cadence and volumes has always been such an issue that I have come in contact with clients with. They want to bleed the animals too many times, too high of a volume, too many different routes. And so in those cases, we have to go back to the drawing board. It's also important to have an established and transparent escalation pathway internally to ensure animal welfare is always properly addressed. This applies not only during the study execution when animals are exhibiting stress and decline, but also in the planning phase to ensure only approved techniques are in the study design. These pathways need to be established and transparent to ensure the high standard of animal welfare is being met, and if needed, resources like me can be utilized to help address questionable situations. And finally, collaborating with the sales team to ensure compliance. This goes back to staff education and the culture of raising your hand and asking a question. As a preclinical CRO, high safety standards are critical. The compounds we handle are generally not fully characterized, and to protect the safety of the animals, animal technicians, formulators, and any other staff handling these compounds, a higher standard of PPE and safe handling practices must be utilized. As a CRO, we do accept animals from non-preferred vendors. When receiving these animals, rigorous pathogen screening must be performed to protect the main population of animals. Also, clients will design studies with their own cell lines, and to protect both our main population and our incubators, these cells are also screened for pathogens. It's important for us to educate clients that these screenings must be done in order to safely protect our resources and prevent any breaches in our facility. Finally, conducting studies under OSHA and state-specific standards is required. Certus is located in California, thus we adhere to Cal-OSHA standards. Other states have their own standards. These standards include a high level of PPE to protect our personnel and animals, as well as ergonomics. We must account for animal technicians performing repetitive tasks on studies and protect them from injuries. And finally, it is important for us to remember that we are human. These are some of Certus's animals. We like to remember that we not only work with mice, but we have all animals in our lives. And a little about Certus. We are a life science technology combining AI and advanced cancer models to accelerate the development of new cancer therapies. These are just some of the services we offer. Additionally, Certus is also a pre-qualified supplier on the scientist.com disease model selection platform.
So thank you so much, both Diana and Megan. It was really interesting, I think, to hear about how the industry and how non-government and nonprofits can support legislation, because legislation is just one piece of the puzzle. And with that, I would like to talk a little bit briefly about how to apply these standards. This is great knowledge, but how do you practically do this in your workflows, in your everyday life? How can you be sure that you're meeting these requirements? So one of the ways that I mentioned before is that scientist.com does some due diligence. And we have a standard commercial due diligence, but we also offer Comply and Verify suites. So Comply is our digital tool. It comes with service-specific agreements, and you can actually manage individual requests and proposals to make sure that everything is being done ethically and to your organizational standards, whatever those might be. It's available in a lot of different areas. Obviously, today, animal welfare is the focus, but that's also available in person. So our Verify system, our program, does on-site independent third-party auditors go to do a pre-assessment of animal welfare, and then that report is available to stakeholders at our clients. So it can be a really easy way to do some of that extra due diligence and kind of reach that next level in your research. We also can support you as an individual team. So our subject matter experts are proactive. We'll help you with your assessments. We will communicate with you when there are issues, and we'll also help you reach out to suppliers and understand what your risk and exposure is in case that there is an issue. There are some further things we can do for you as well if you're concerned about something like rodent hygiene. This is an interesting case where clients were concerned about rodents coming into their facility that had an unknown hygiene status. So we can set all these custom items up for you and really help you make sure that you're achieving your organizational goals and adhering to the best animal welfare practices possible. So to do that, I always like to talk about defining risk. We start by defining the risk for your organization. You can evaluate suppliers, assign reviewers. Some of you listening today might be those that review research and studies for your colleagues or review things coming into your CRO. So it's always important to have those responsible parties and then to train people. Megan LaFollette focused a little bit earlier on informing people and really getting that kind of community buy-in and awareness. And that's important with people that are conducting research or requesting or even paying for research. We all need to understand what's going on in our organization. And then the regular review. As animal welfare, quality, and techniques continue to improve, we also need to regularly review our processes to make sure that we're maintaining the highest and the most recent standards. So with that, I would like to remind you that you can submit some Q&A questions to the poll over there on the right-hand tab. And I would like to also go ahead and invite my colleagues, Megan and Diana, to answer some questions. So the first question we have that just came up is let's see, Diana, what difficulties do you face when you're meeting client requirements and if they need to work to a different regional standard?
Yes, that's a great question. So sometimes we have different standards, as in the UK, their standards are usually a little bit higher than the United States standards. So generally speaking, when we work with those kind of clients, they will have specific requests that come in. So we do try to adapt as many in for that specific study, but also we look at what other improvements could we make from those requirements that those clients bring to us, whether it's different forms of handling, different tumor burden limits, different humane endpoints, things in that nature. We like to look at all of those and see what can we bring into our program as well as providing for their studies. Now, we've also had clients on the other side that have had lower standards or less restrictions on their studies that they would like put into their studies that they're running with Certus, and sometimes it's a higher tumor burden or different humane endpoints. That's something we can't do. We have to at least maintain our current standards for the United States. We can't go below, but we can always go above.
Excellent, thank you. The next question is for Megan. How can individuals get more involved in kind of defining these animal welfare standards or voice their opinions, kind of share the learnings that we have as, technicians or study directors or veterinarians? How can we kind of get that out there?
Yeah, so it's going to kind of depend on your particular role and your particular facility. Some institutions have like 3Rs programs, 3Rs committees, refinement programs, etc. And so if your institution has some sort of internal mechanism for kind of voicing concerns, etc., you can work through those official kind of networks. I've also definitely known that, sometimes there's people at an organization that are just really passionate and they start that program. Maybe they are at the technician level and they really want to try refined mouse handling. Well, you talk to your manager, you start that conversation there. And then you can work from the ground up to kind of form these small groups of people to forward a particular 3Rs related idea at the organization level. And then the final thing that I'll say is volunteering with other nonprofits, whether it's the 3Rs Collaborative or a local nonprofit, etc. There's often volunteer opportunities where you can kind of influence the field. I know ALAC has, board of directors. We've got a board of directors. Megan Loy is on it. And so there's different ways that you can kind of give back your time. We also have our initiatives to kind of create materials for the wider field. So lots of different ways that, anybody kind of regardless of their level can make an impact whether it's internal or external to their individual institution.
Thank you. That was a great answer. We have another question. How can I ensure that my external work meets my institutional standards? Are there specific questions I should ask? I'm going to touch on that one a little bit just because I help with outsourcing so much. You should definitely talk to your internal animal care and use groups, whether they're called animal welfare or animal using vendors or in vivo externalization, whatever that name might be. You should try to connect with someone on that team to find out what the standards are that you adhere to in your organization, especially if you're looking to work outside of your region. So if you are, say, based in the US and you're looking to place work in another country, or vice versa, you're looking to place something here, but you're working in Europe, you always want to make sure that you're meeting your institutional requirements, no matter what location that is. Asking questions about things like humane endpoints, housing, whether your dogs can be in individual cages or runs, things like that, wire bottom caging. And then also enrichment can be important for some of those individual projects. So it's always good to ask your leadership, if possible, or a sourcing manager, whoever you might have internally. And then, as Diana mentioned before, doing things like double checking blood volumes, tumor sizes, looking to see what's standard, what's okay, can be really helpful when you're looking to design your project or do research. And you can also get really valuable insights from your supplier like Certus, because if you come to Diana and you ask for 100 mils of blood from a rat, she's going to tell you no. So you can always reach out to your suppliers. They're also very knowledgeable.
Can I add to that too, Megan?
Yes, please. Yes.
That is definitely something that's a very important point there. A lot of times we will be working with people that are not in vivo by trade or have done that kind of study before, and they don't understand the specifics of it. And so sometimes we'll have a study design that is presented, but then when it comes time for a supplier audit or the animal welfare that comes in from their regulatory body, like they're in their actual company, it's completely different. And so we have conflicting information. We don't know where to go, who to talk to, who supersedes who. So it's very, very important for all clients that are reaching out to suppliers such as Certus that you know exactly what your standards are and exactly what you need to do with your study, because it helps to facilitate and move things forward a lot faster too.
We have another very interesting question. When going for regulatory approval in the US, like for a new drug, is there any specific animal welfare standards or criteria that those bodies may require from the preclinical studies that they're conducting? Does anybody want to grab that, or I can start it off?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, in the US, obviously the FDA is responsible for the approval of new drugs, and they do really focus on conducting your animal studies in a humane way. So the humane treatment is important, and they are really big on the 3 R's. So somebody like the 3 R's collaborative, or our group like us, can be really helpful. So the replacement, reduction, and refinement, they want to see you doing that. They also have some specific criteria that are outlined as part of GLP, good laboratory practice regulations, and you're expected to kind of adhere to those standards because of the ethical treatment and the reliability of those study results. So in that case, it's not just about the welfare, but it's also about the quality of your study results. Megan or Diana, did you want to add to that?
I would just add that, generally to the FDA, the primary goal of the FDA is going to be, making sure that the drugs, the food that are going into populations are safe. Whereas it might be more of the USDA, as well as some external accrediting bodies, such as ALAC, that are more like getting into kind of the nitty-gritties of animal welfare itself. Certainly FDA plays a really important role in the field, but again, it's useful for each government agent to kind of segment like their big core focus. And so that's the other thing that I just add is, again, their main goal is making sure that when we take drugs, that they have been determined to be safe and effective. That's their kind of number one thing.
Perfect. That's kind of how I touched on with talking about Certus as a preclinical CRO, and that's been my experience in the preclinical CRO space is that we don't know what we're testing. Most of those drugs that are coming through have not been fully characterized. Therefore, we have to have high levels of safety standards, not only for technicians, but also for the animals, formulators, et cetera. So with that being said, we kind of upfront test a lot of those. And that's why we rely on the guide. We rely on ALAC, we rely on AVMA, all of those things, and our iCook specifically to ensure that we are operating as safely as possible with those uncharacterized compounds that are coming through.
That's a really great point. I'm probably not the only person who has been to the eye wash station after getting mystery test material in my eye or my mouth or whatever. So it's important to maintain those safety standards.
That's why we check them every month.
Yes. So we are running low on time. We have time for one more question. And then if there are remaining questions, we will email you afterwards. This one's really fun though, so I definitely want to read it. I study rodent behavior and I want to provide more enrichment than my institutional standard, which is cardboard tubes. Do you have advice or resources to share about adding environmental enrichment while maintaining standard environments? Megan, do you want to start? I know you love this topic.
Yeah, so we have a whole page on refinement of both rats and mice and has ideas for really evidence-based ways to do that. So you can find that on our website. I'll also, go ahead and put the one, at least for mice, in the chat. Nesting material is really, really important. That, if you don't have that, I think you just said rodents, so I don't know if it's or rats, but either of them would appreciate nesting materials, chew blocks, the refined mouse handling, actually using those cardboard tubes and lifting them up. And as long as you're doing them consistently, you should be really supported. And if anything, there's actually been some really interesting recent research about really purposeful biological variability in that humans are very variable. And so it's not always actually a bad thing, as long as you do it evenly across all treatment groups, to have a little bit of variation in your population, because it's more likely to actually lead to a true result in humans. So again, that's a very brief of the summary, but that's what I'd say.
Could I add to that as well?
Yes, go ahead.
I did behavior for 9 years, so I know exactly where the asker is coming from. Things that you can also incorporate, actually at Certus, we have a rotational enrichment that we add in. We add in crinkle paper, we add in nestlets, we add in domes. But behavior, it's much more important to have that stimulation with those animals. And so I used to use, personally, I would add in the cardboard tubes, I would add in domes, I would add in nestlets, I would change it, I would do the chew blocks, the nyla bones. But also, if you can do any food-based behavioral additions, the little small chocolate balls were always fun to smell, but also handling your animals and really getting them familiar with you, because that also decreases that underlying stress that those animals have. Also, the type of caging that you have in there. Are you using the Innovive or IBC caging, or are you using home cages? So are they used to the noises that they're hearing and background noises that they would hear when you're actually executing the experiment? Those are big things that you can also do in addition to enrichment and changing the enrichment up so the animals are continuously stimulated.
Perfect. Thank you both so much. And thank you all for listening. I think this is a really great opportunity to hear how the industry and nonprofits, non-government organizations actually influence the legislation, but also supplement it and really support what we're doing in our industry to be to the highest standards that we can for animal welfare. And with that, we just want to thank you for coming today. Have a good rest of your day, and we look forward to the next session.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.